We have a situation in most governments around the world, capitals, including in Ottawa, where it's really a system of trading favors. And there's subtle ways of trading favors, wining and dining people and just getting to know them and build a relationship, and then sort of trading on that relationship. And then there's the more direct, giving big donations, doing huge fundraising efforts, working on election campaigns, helping out in very direct and substantial ways with politicians, and with government officials as well. You're not involved in elections, but giving them weekends at chalets and those kind of larger gifts. And what's been shown by a guy named Robert Cialdini mostly, but there's other research as well throughout North America, is that giving these kind of gifts and doing these kinds of favors is scientifically, psychologically, the most potent way to influence someone. And it's called the science of influence. And what they've identified is 6 major ways to influence people. Some of them are legitimate in a democracy, such as showing that there's authorities that are expert, and that will influence someone, and also showing lots of people agree with something, which is also another democratic way. But one of the undemocratic ways, and the most potent way, is to give something to someone or do a favor for them. So we've been challenging this whole system that is allowing that to continue, and allowing these undemocratic, unethical ways of influence to be used by lobbyists in Ottawa. And it's been a 9-year saga with this particular complaint and court case. But overall, the whole 15 years that Democracy Watch has been operating, we've been trying to get these ethics rules enforced that say this stuff is illegal, but the rules have never been enforced. And now we've won a ruling that orders the Commissioner of Lobbying to enforce them.
How extensive is this practice of quid pro quos here in Ottawa?
Well, it's really hard to know how extensive it is. There are lots of examples that have come to the public of large donations. We have 5 complaints that still haven't been ruled on about various lobbyists fundraising for ministers, giving big donations to ministers. And the test complaint that went to the Federal Court of Appeal was about a lobbyist raising $70,000 for a minister at the same time as being registered to lobby that minister. How often it goes on, how many golf games there are, and dinners out and lunches, very difficult to tell because everyone's participating in it, and so no one really wants it to stop. The lobbyists are getting influence and access. The politicians are getting all sorts of nice perks and support for being reelected and funds for their campaigns. So who knows exactly? I think the complaints, the stuff that has been made public, some of the most serious cases, is really just the tip of the iceberg.
Your success in the Court of Appeals this month follows on, as you said, at least 8 years of work, and more than that, I understand. And a big part of that struggle, I guess, was trying to get the authorities in control of ethics and lobbying to forge and recognize and enforce a standard. Is that correct?
Yes, the Politicians Code was actually brought in by Brian Mulroney January 1st, 1986. It says that politicians and their staff and cabinet appointees can't accept these kind of gifts or favors very clearly, because it's something that could influence them, and that's an unethical influence, to essentially be buying a decision from them. And of course we have the criminal code that is real bribery, but this is more subtle, where someone wouldn't ask for a favor. They would just give you a gift or a few gifts over time, do favors for you, and that would influence your decisions. So that rule's existed since '86. The Lobbyists Code came in '97, has a similar rule for lobbyists, saying lobbyists can't give the gifts or do the favors for the politicians and other policymakers. And neither the ethics counselor, now ethics commissioner, nor the registrar of lobbyists, and now the position is called commissioner of lobbying, none of them were enforcing these rules. And we had filed many complaints, about half a dozen, and it took 6 years to get a ruling on them initially. Then we challenged it in court. So now finally, March 12, 2009, the Federal Court of Appeal has said, this is what this rule means: lobbyists cannot give these gifts or do favors for policymakers they're lobbying. And last year, the Ethics Commissioner issued a guideline saying that the politicians and policymakers can't accept the gifts or other favors from people who are lobbying them. So the question is now, okay, now we have more words on paper, more definite. We know for sure it's all illegal. Will it now be enforced? And our next, however long it takes, will be filing complaints and chasing after them if they do not enforce them and make good rulings that find that people are acting unethically and illegally.
The idea that lobbyists can't give gifts or special services to office holders, or that office holders can't accept them, seems like common sense, and yet it hasn't been interpreted as common sense or enforced, from what I'm hearing.
No, it is common sense. It goes back centuries. The first writers on government wrote about these situations, and conflict of interest is well known, the standard worldwide. And so we've really had a sham, a true Orwellian scheme running to cover up unethical lobbying, unethical relationships between lobbyists and the most powerful politicians and policymakers in Canada for the past, really for decades, but we've had the rules on paper for the past 23 years, and we've had a sham enforcement scheme that has just not enforced those rules for the past 23 years. Of course, before the rules were created in '86, this stuff went on as well, has gone on right since Canada was created 142 years ago. But to actually put rules on paper and then not enforce them for 23 years, I mean, that is one of the most egregious scandals in Canadian government history, a real sham.
Could you give me some examples of some of the prominent politicians who've been involved in these kinds of lobbying scandals that haven't been prosecuted?
Sure. Well, Democracy Watch started in 1993, and the Liberals won that election in November '93. So most of our complaints are aimed at the Liberals because they were in power through the time we've been in existence for most of the time. And so we have lobbyists at a firm called Earnscliffe Strategy Group that were working on Paul Martin's leadership campaign. We don't know exactly what they were doing, but they admitted publicly they were raising funds and doing various things to help him out when he was sort of had a secret campaign trying to get the leadership from Jean Chrétien of the Federal Liberal Party. And so we've complained about those lobbyists, other lobbyists that were working for Prime Minister Jean Chrétien in his riding, while also lobbying him. Beyond Paul Martin, other Liberal cabinet ministers ran for the leadership in 2002, 2003. They all took donations that even the ethics counselor said were unethical, but none of them were found guilty of breaking the rules. They had to return the donations, and they got let off for that, and that includes Alan Rock, former Minister of Industry and Minister of Justice, John Manley, who was Minister of Industry and Finance Minister as well, Sheila Copps, who was Heritage Minister. So we have 5 outstanding complaints that still have not been ruled on. This one complaint about a lobbyist who was raised $70,000 for a minister he was lobbying, that was the test complaint, the first one ruled on, and that's the one we took through the court system. And now with this Federal Court of Appeal ruling, we'll be pushing the Commissioner of Lobbying to make rulings on these past complaints. Plus I have about another 100 lobbyists to complain about, people who worked on the last Liberal leadership campaign where Stéphane Dion won. Most of the leadership campaign candidates in that Liberal leadership race had corporate lobbyists as their chief campaigners. And so there's those people I'll be complaining about, many others as well with the Harper government also.
Do you anticipate, as a result of the ruling this month, that there will be more enforcement or system enforcement or any kind of systematic enforcement of these provisions?
I don't anticipate that, just because I've watched a sham for the past decade, and I've seen 3 different ethics watchdogs act as lapdogs and just roll over and do nothing about this situation. 3 different people. So now we have a new Commissioner of Lobbying. She worked with the old lobbyist watchdog who was a lapdog. She was the deputy. So she didn't go public at that time and say this was wrong. We're hopefully soon getting a Commissioner of Lobbying appointed. It may be her, this woman Karen Shepherd, or someone else. And we'll see what they do. We'll be filing the complaints. If they do not rule properly, we'll be back in court, and we'll just keep chasing after them, because these rules are actually according to the Supreme Court of Canada, the most important rules. In a ruling in 1996, they said you do not have a democracy if these rules are not effectively and strictly enforced. So essentially, we don't have a democracy in Canada simply because these rules are not being enforced.